Coming up on this episode of Crime Family,
we're going to be talking about the O.J. Simpson case. He is described as, quote, being in a different world than the rest of us, end quote.
Can you get someone over here now to 325 Gretna Green? He's back. Please.
Okay, what does he look like?
He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. He's in a white Bronco, but first of all, he broke the back door down to get in.
Okay, wait a minute. What's your name?
Nicole Simpson.
OJ was tracked down and he was contacted at his hotel that morning in Chicago. And by all accounts, he did seem very frantic and distraught by the news.
The news gets out that O.J. Simpson's ex-wife and her friend Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her home. So this is major news and kind of really ignites the firestorm that we're going to be talking about. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Crime Family. We're back for season 5, which is really exciting. We've been away for 10 months now, and you're probably wondering where we've been. So we're excited to be back with a brand new season. And yeah, we didn't quite plan for our hiatus to be as long as it was, but life happens, and it was a busy 10 months. I know for me, I was in school for the last couple of years. I finished my program and then went on a trip to Morocco and Portugal for a month. And it was, a busy summer. So lots of stuff happening. So we're finally back in the studio. We're in our own 3 individual studios recording for you guys. So I'm also here with Katie and Stephanie, who are back for the new season as well. Say hi.
Hello. Yay, we're back.
What's life been like for the last 10 months? Our fans want to know.
Busy. Everybody knows I had a child in January, so busy with that. My daughter started school in September, so I was busy with that and just life in general, raising 2 kids. Just busy. Going to school.
I also had a baby in the summer, so that kept me busy. And we were, just put everything in context, we were all working full time. We were all still in school. Steph had a baby, then I had a baby. So we were just kind of needed a break from this and everything, really. So that's kind of why we took such a long break, I think. I was burnt out anyway, but I'm feeling fresh and we're ready to go.
Yeah, when we finished our last season, I don't think we anticipated being away this long. We just kind of, ended up happening. We have 2 new members of the Crime Family, like Katie said. Yeah, Steph actually had her baby back in January while we were still recording the last season, and that's why she was off for a few episodes of last season. And then Katie had her baby while we were on hiatus. So I think that maybe extended our hiatus a little bit longer, but yeah. And by the time you're hearing this episode, it's, the new year, and we're back and ready to, talk some true crime with you guys. So before we get into our first case of the season, I kind of want to talk about how we're going to structure this season, because it is going to look a little bit different than our previous seasons. So obviously, if you've been a fan of the show, you kind of know how we've done our seasons before. We usually would do, one episode would be 1 case. Sometimes it'd be like a 2-part episode if it was a longer case. But generally, if we had 20 episodes in a season, it would be 20, more or less cases that we would cover. And like Katie said, she said she was feeling burnt out. I was myself feeling burnt out, and it's a lot of work. We don't have an editing team or a research team. The 3 of us are doing it all on our own. So just doing research on our own. And, how we would do it is, we would each research our own cases and then bring those cases to the show. So sometimes for my episodes, like Katie and Steph would be hearing the case for the first time. So it was kind of all on me to do all the research for that case and do all of like the grunt work, and I would usually edit. So we just found that it was really a lot of work, especially with, like Katie said, we were in school and working full time. So it wasn't the most sustainable way to do it, even though we liked, being able to, talk about so many cases. So this year, we're taking a little bit of a different approach, and we've decided that we're going to be covering some really high profile cases for this season. So we're still going to have 20 episodes that we've always had per season, but we're going to be tackling 5 cases, which means we'll be doing, each case will be over 4 episodes, which is really going to allow us to kind of dig deeper into the details. Because these are high profile cases, there's a lot of information out there on them. So we really felt that we would be able to have 4 episodes devoted to each case, because we wanted to be able to go into detail and also give you our opinions on these cases. So if you're a true crime fan, then you're going to be probably familiar with most of the cases we're going to talk about this season. But our hope is that either you learn something new about the case, or at the very least, you're just interested in hearing our perspective on the case and our opinions, because I'm sure we're going to have lots of opinions as we go along, and we're not always going to agree. So I know for myself, even though if I'm listening to a true crime podcast and I know the case already, I still want to listen to that episode. I'm still interested, especially if it's a case that I'm really invested in, because I still want to hear what those hosts' thoughts are on this case. And I always usually learn at least 1 or 2 new things that maybe I had forgotten about or didn't know. So that's our goal here this season, is to take on these high profile cases, but hopefully add something new to the conversation, or at the very least, pique your interest with our opinions of the cases. So that's what we're going for. And I guess without further ado, do either of you have any comments or anything you want to add about how we're structuring the season?
Just one thing to add, I think for those that are signed up or want to be signed up for our Patreon site, we're going to be doing a little bit different. We're just going to have one basic rate, I think. So if you want to support the podcast, we'll have one basic rate, and then just anything extra we'll dump in there rather than different levels, and trying to keep up with that. I think that was one of the other things that was kind of burning us out, was we have 20 episodes and then we were trying to get all this extra stuff in there as well. So that's going to be the new plan going forward for now.
Yeah, and hopefully that will allow us to, you can still support us, but we'll just be able to keep on top of the extra content in the Patreon, since it'll just be one, tier. Right now before we had 3 tiers that you could sign up for, and it would obviously different benefits, but it was a lot to keep up with on top of everything. So also, because we're going to be doing these big cases that have a lot of information, all 3 of us did our part in the research. So it wasn't just one of us researching these cases and bringing it to the show. All of us know about the cases. We've done the research, which definitely helps to lighten the load research wise. So we're all going to take turns kind of narrating or telling you the story. So we're still going to go over the case in detail, or, in the timeline that we always do, because we understand that, maybe not everyone is super familiar with the details of every case, even if you've heard of it. So still going to kind of do it the same way, just knowing that there's a lot of these details that you might already know. But like I said, hopefully that you'll be learning something new during our conversation about the case. So that's the goal. So without further ado, we're going to get into our first part of the first case of the season, which is if you are listening, you probably see the title of the episode. We're going to be talking about the O.J. Simpson case. And this is one that you've no doubt at least heard about, at least, the basic details of the case, or are familiar with who O.J. Simpson is. And we're going to be starting in this part 1 of this case. We're going to be giving you some background information about O.J. and events leading up to the crime of the murders. And then we're going to be talking about the crime scene and sort of the initial investigation that happened. So that's what we're going to be tackling in this first part. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it.
O.J. Simpson. This used to be a household name, and it probably still is a familiar name for many, especially those that are interested in true crime or the professional football world. So Orenthal James, or O.J. Simpson, was a professional football player, but he is most famous now for his trial for the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman.
So the O.J. Simpson case happened nearly 30 years ago, back in 1994, and to this day remains one of the most high-profile murder trials in history. There's been countless documentaries, countless, fictional accounts or, reenactments of the case, and lots of information out there. Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were both found dead in the driveway of Nicole's home shortly after midnight on June 13th, 1994. And it wasn't long before the number one suspect came into pretty clear focus by the authorities. And that was Nicole's ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, who also happened to, not just be her ex-husband, but was also at the time a movie star, a celebrity, and a previous National Football League star player. So he was pretty high profile at the time that these murders took place.
So a little bit of background about OJ. He was born in 1947 in San Francisco, California, to Eunice and Jimmy Lee Simpson. He grew up with 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. He also had a baby sister who was born before him named Patricia, but she was born and sadly died in 1942. When his parents divorced in 1952, OJ and his siblings lived with their mother, and OJ had gotten into a bit of trouble in his teen years. He reportedly joined a gang at the age of 13, and he was sent to a juvenile detention center for a week after a fighting altercation. And throughout school, he got very poor grades, but due to his extreme talent in football, he was admitted to the University of Southern California as a halfback on their football team. In June of 1967, at the age of 19, OJ married his first wife, Marguerite Whitley. They had 3 children together, Arnell, Jason, and Aaron, but tragically their daughter Erin, who was born in 1977, died a month before her 2nd birthday when she drowned in their swimming pool.
So one of the major resources we used when researching this case was the Academy Award-winning documentary OJ Made in America. And this is a 5-part documentary film that follows the OJ case all the way from OJ's early life to his football career and his many achievements, all the way to the infamous trial that became dubbed the Trial of the Century. This documentary showcases OJ's rise to fame against the backdrop of the civil rights movement in 1960s America. He is described as, quote, being in a different world than the rest of us, end quote. And he became a role model for many people and sort of a symbol of racial reconciliation in the years that followed the abolition of Jim Crow laws in the American South. So how is it that a society that for centuries and decades before this separated and singled out Black people as being less than white people, and obviously still continues to this day, how is it that they would accept a Black celebrity as one of them, and not only accept him, but not even, really acknowledge that he was Black, or, they really he was one of the first celebrities to kind of overcome that sort of barrier. And this is one of the earliest demonstrations of the impact of fame, power, and celebrity that transcends social standing. So for many people, OJ wasn't seen as a Black man, but was seen as an individual that was known for his overwhelming achievements, his charisma, and charm. So one example that they give in this documentary that really kind of showcases this is someone in the documentary is, telling a story of how OJ would be sitting at a table at a bar with a bunch of other Black people, and there would be people who would comment about why OJ was sitting at the table with all those Blacks. And they didn't use the word Blacks in the documentary, but obviously I'm not going to say what they actually said. But this kind of just shows you that even for people who were racist and didn't like Black people, they could still like OJ because they didn't see him as being a Black man, but just an athlete and a celebrity that they admired. So they would say, why is he sitting at the table over there with those Black people, not knowing that, or not realizing, or, he was Black himself. And why wouldn't he be sitting with them? And also, why would that matter in the end anyway? So it's so wild to see the impact that he really did have. And this documentary, I think the first 2 parts of it are really focused on his rise to fame and just kind of putting into context how high profile he really was and how revered he was during this point in time when he really was at the height of his career. just one thing, I believe it's mentioned in the documentary, and I've seen it in other sources as well, that there was also, some controversy or some contention within the Black community in America, because here he was, a Black man that sort of seemingly rejected his own ethnicity and cultural background to be accepted among white America. And maybe if he didn't consciously reject it, he never really sort of, hung out with a lot of Black people outside of his family or as like close friends, but he really was part of, high society in America that consisted of mostly white, rich men.
Also,
And
he
go ahead.
did kind of separate himself because he himself said, I'm not Black, I'm OJ. That was kind of his term that he would say to him or say about himself. So he did separate himself.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess maybe he, in his mind, was thinking like, oh, I'm just saying that, like, in his defense, he could say, well, wasn't separating myself. I was just trying to say, like, well, color doesn't matter. I'm here. I'm just OJ. I'm a person. But really, like, within the context of what was going on at that time, and even today, like, no, I think he was just wanted to be accepted and kind of rise in that way. And he kind of felt that in order to do that, he had to sort of, buddy up to all of these white men mostly, and kind of put his own sort of ethnicity and identity to the side in order to do that.
It
No, go
kind
ahead.
of like goes to show that like celebrities think that they're all that, like they can just like they're all higher up and stuff. So when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself like, like celebrities sometimes are characterized in a different category because of how famous they are, and it doesn't really matter like what color they are, whatever. I think that's why people saw him as not just a Black man, but treated him a little differently as well.
Yeah, and I think putting it into the context of the time that it's happening, when he was rising in fame due to his football career, like in the 60s and 70s, like I said, it was during, following the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and all of that. And so I think other artists at that time, or celebrities maybe at that time, being Black was just, they would talk a lot about, their struggles and like what it was like to be a Black person in America at that time. And he never really, publicly at least, never really talked about that, never really seemed to care about that. It was more like he was the exception to the rule. And because of that, he was just going to do his thing and he was going to be OJ because he knew everyone loved him. When the reality was that for many other Black people who were, even if they were celebrities and they were well known and people loved them, they still, were very much aware that, they were an exception, or that they had different struggles than what, someone who was white in America at that time had. So he didn't really give into that or talk about that or really make that a part of his story at all. So he really was one of the first that kind of transcended that barrier and was just seen as OJ. So that was just interesting. And one thing that's going to be interesting is kind of seeing how this sentiment sort of shifts, because at this time it was like white America loved him, and it was the Black community that maybe he was seen as sort of rejecting a little bit. But, as we'll see later on during the trial, how those roles kind of switch and we kind of get a little bit of the opposite impact. So that'll be interesting to kind of address later on as we get to it. But yeah, just something that is interesting.
And in that same documentary, OJ Made in America, everyone talks about how great of a guy OJ seemingly was. So not only was he considered one of, if not the best college football player ever up until that point, but everyone thought he was just a great person. He was a role model, especially for young Black children, even if, he didn't himself step into that role and embrace the Black community after he got out of poverty himself. And he kind of was this role model for Black children, even more so because of, like AJ was saying, the racism and the police brutality in Black communities of the 60s and the civil rights movements that were taking place. He was just admired. He was a talented man, and he was very well spoken, kind, and loved throughout America and throughout the world even. And so this is what makes his case even more shocking when everything unravels, because he was such a celebrated public figure without the outwardly cocky attitude that we often see in the media today when it comes to athletes or celebrities. Like, in the beginning, he didn't seem like he had that kind of attitude anyway. And it also touches on the idea that OJ was very self-aware and knew who he had to be successful. And it suggested that he was building this character of OJ and consciously becoming what he needed to be successful. So it wasn't just something that was happening to him and he happened to be successful. It was like this very calculated kind of thing that he was doing to make sure that he was successful. And he was very aware of that. And so one could speculate that he really was an incredible actor, as he was pretending to be someone else his entire career. So to the public, he really was hiding his true self all those years. And deep down inside, and as we'll see, he was actually angry, jealous, and very violent behind closed doors, particularly with his second wife, Nicole.
Although OJ was married to Marguerite until 1979 officially, he ended up meeting Nicole Brown in 1977 while she was working as a waitress at a nightclub that OJ frequented often. The couple did reportedly begin dating while he was still married to Marguerite. OJ eventually would go on to retire from professional football in 1980 after a successful run as a running back for the Buffalo Bills. And during his football career, he won the Heisman Trophy and broke a series of records for the sport. And so as you're kind of getting the vibe based on what we've said so far, like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like you couldn't be a football fan without knowing who OJ Simpson was. He was hands down the most famous athlete for his entire football career.
See, for me, just because of how old this case is, I never saw him as a football star. Because to me, I don't know him as that. Because I was too young to know, like, to watch football back when he was in the league. Because when I first heard of OJ, I didn't even know he was a football player. So to me, it's weird to like, when I was watching the documentary, to like see him back in football, because that's not something I know. To me, he's not OJ the football star. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, arguably now, even for people who knew him as a football star, he's not even that to them anymore either, right? It kind of totally, he is known for what he is known for now, which obviously we'll get into and everyone knows. But interesting to see like how, you know, for the people, like the older generations, they had to go from seeing him as this person to the shift in like what he ended up turning out to be known as, versus us, which like knew him as that originally, and then had to go back and learn like, oh yeah, he actually was like a huge celebrity who, you know, changed the world of football or the sport of football in a way with breaking all these records. So it is interesting kind of our perspective versus people who knew him as OJ, the football star. And so like for comparison, I kind of wanted to just put this in here too, is trying to, I guess, related, if you haven't seen the documentary, I guess it would be similar to what Tom Brady's status would be today. Like Tom Brady is, you know, a household name for football and non-football fans. Like obviously I don't watch football, never have, probably never will, but I know who Tom Brady is, and most people do. He has a lot of endorsements, and he's just, you know, a big celebrity who is a football player. So that's kind of what the comparison would be to OJ at that time, was sort of how ubiquitous he was. And, you know, the Juice is also what people would call OJ a lot too, who's known as the Juice. So like I said, OJ met Nicole Brown while she was a waitress at one of the restaurants or the bars that he would frequent. And 8 years after first meeting her, he ended up marrying Nicole in 1985, and together the couple had 2 children, Sydney and Justin. And his marriage to Nicole was marred in controversy and turmoil, with a series of domestic violence disputes between the two. And in 1989, OJ actually pleaded no contest to a domestic violence charge against him. And that was sort of just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, so people were starting to see through this nice guy facade that OJ had going on. Some describe him as a womanizer. He cheated on Marguerite and Nicole multiple times. Nicole knew about the affairs, and of course she was not happy about them, but OJ didn't seem to care. Her confronting him was not going to make him stop. He became very entitled and expected to be treated a certain way, almost as if the rules didn't apply to him. And not only was he constantly cheating, but he was also very abusive and very controlling of Nicole as well. It's reported that he would beat her and lock her in closets when she would question him about where he had been when he was out cheating. Overall, their marriage was destined to fail, and after 7 years, Nicole filed for divorce in 1992. But the abuse continued. He would follow her or have people report back to him, so he knew who she was with and where she was at all times. So if he wasn't able to go somewhere where she happened to be, he would have kind of like spies that would go out and infiltrate her friend groups and report back to him. Nicole moved out of their home that they shared together, and she got her own place. She started seeing a man named Marcus, but there were several times when OJ would like break into her place in a rage, confronting her, just yelling. And there's 911 calls from October of 1993, and you can hear him yelling at Nicole, and she's telling the 911 operator that he's going to beat the shit out of her. I do have one of those 911 calls here that I can play for everyone.
911 emergency.
Can you get someone over here now to 325 Gretna Green? He's back. Please.
Well, okay, what does he look like?
He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. Could you just send somebody over here?
Okay, what is he doing there?
He just drove up again.
He just drove
somebody
up.
over?
Okay, wait a minute. What kind of car is he in?
He's in a white Bronco, but first of all, he broke the back door down to get in.
Okay, wait a minute. What's your name?
Nicole Simpson.
Okay, is he the sportscaster or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Wait a minute. We're sending the police. What is he doing? Is he threatening you?
I'm going nuts.
Okay, has he threatened you in any way, or is he just harassing you?
You're going to hear him in a minute. He's about to come in again.
Okay, just stay on the line.
I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the shit out of me.
Wait a minute. Wait, just stay on the line so we can know what's going on until the police get there, okay? Okay, Nicole?
Uh-huh.
Just a moment. Does he have any weapons?
I don't know.
Okay.
He went home, now he's back. The
Okay.
kids are upstairs sleeping, and I don't want anything to happen.
Okay. Has he hit you today or no?
No.
Okay, you don't need any paramedics or anything? Okay. You just want him to
Closed my
leave.
door. He broke the whole back door in.
And then he left and he came back?
And he came and he practically knocked my upstairs door down, but he pounded it, and then he screamed and hollered, and I tried to get him out of the bedroom because the kids were sleeping in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then he wanted somebody's phone number, and I gave him my phone book and put my phone book down to write down the phone number that he wanted, and then he took my phone book with all my stuff in it. What?
What does he say?
What he always says.
Units, your domestic violence at 30 Correction 325 South Gretna Greenway is now too high. The suspect is now entered in the shelter, and it is refusing to leave. It's code too high. Incident 4221 already 825 children involved. Just stay on the line, okay? Is he upset with something that you did?
A long time ago, it always comes back.
As you can hear in that 911 call, you can just hear kind of like the terror in Nicole's voice. It's also, she's scared, but also you can tell that this, it's in the first time this has happened, and that it's kind of like a routine thing. So you can just kind of hear that in her voice, and it's really sad when you know kind of what happened to her. Despite all this violence and jealousy, they did attempt to reconcile after their divorce, to no avail. Although they loved each other, their marriage was, like I said, it was just filled with jealousy, violence, and toxicity. Nicole wanted to have her kids grow up with both of their parents around, so that was why I think she was trying so hard to make their relationship work. But ultimately, in May of 1994, they call it quits for good. And this is when, reportedly, OJ just really sheds that persona that he had worked so hard for. He began to spiral, and he didn't care if the world saw who he really was. And OJ even says that he'll kill Nicole if he sees her with Marcus again.
So OJ's rocky and toxic relationship with Nicole would be a major topic of discussion in the years following their divorce, and especially during the infamous murder trial that was to follow just a few short years later. So that kind of shows you, a quick sort of overview of what his and Nicole's relationship was like for the entire time that they were together and they were married. And this brings us all the way up to June of 1994. And so this would have been, a couple of years after their divorce. And a timeline of events from CNN describes a few events from the night of June 12th. of 1994. And so this timeline describes that at around 10:15 p.m. on June 12th, neighbors of Nicole Brown state that they began to hear the sound of a dog barking profusely. And then at 10:55 p.m., a dog walker in the area sees Nicole's dog on the street outside her house barking. Then Nicole Simpson would tragically be found dead just after midnight on June 13th of 1994. She and her friend Ronald Goldman were brutally stabbed multiple times in the driveway of Nicole's house on South Bundy Drive, which was located in the upscale neighborhood of Brentwood in Los Angeles. And it really was a horrific attack. In fact, Nicole's wounds were so intense that she was nearly beheaded from the slit across her throat. Nicole was found face down at the bottom of the stairs that led to the home's front door, and although her body was covered in blood, the bottom of her feet were not. Ronald Goldman's body was found close to Nicole's, next to a tree and a fence, and he too had been stabbed multiple times. The door to the home was open at the time the bodies were found, and police confirmed that they did not see signs of a break-in upon their initial investigation. Both Nicole and Ron had very few defensive wounds on their hands, which indicated to investigators that there was a very short struggle. So that likely means that the fatal stab wound was one of the first that was administered, which rendered them basically defenseless before being stabbed many more times after that. Police also suspected that Nicole was the intended target and was killed first, and that perhaps Ron was not an intended target, but was killed because he was a witness to the attack. He was, just a case of wrong place, wrong time. And the police theorized that Nicole had been killed first, just based on kind of how the bodies were found and kind of what their theory ended up looking like. That she was killed first, then Ron was killed after, and then the killer, after killing Ron, the killer returned to Nicole's body and slit her throat before fleeing the scene, which was just, completely overkill, unnecessary. Obviously, she was dead before her throat was slit, so that just kind of shows an extra level of evil that was involved here. So upon first arrival to the crime scene, the police were unaware of who the victim was. But then when they found out that it was Nicole Brown Simpson, eyes then turned to OJ as, if not a suspect, then definitely just a person of interest in the very least. And at the scene, along with the two bodies, the police also found a leather glove for the left hand and a blood trail that led off the property. So this suggested to investigators that the perpetrator was injured on the left side during the attack, and somehow the glove slipped off, and then the perpetrator's blood was dripping on the left side of their body as they fled the scene, which caused the blood trail off the property. So according to the OJ Made in America documentary, police detectives had to notify Nicole's next of kin, which they said was OJ, and I found that kind of interesting, so maybe I either misinterpreted what they said, but I don't really know. OJ was her ex-husband, so I don't know why he would be the next of kin necessarily, or the first one to notify. You'd think it would be her family members or something, but OJ was the first one that they wanted to notify for whatever reason. And so LAPD officer Mark Furman, and he would go on to become critical to this case during the trial, but he says that he had been to OJ's home at Rockingham before, so he knew where it was. He took a few other officers to OJ's home in the early morning hours of June 13th. So this would have been just hours after the bodies had been found. Like I said, they were found just after midnight on the 13th. So this would have been probably, 5, 6 a.m. or something of that nature. So when they get to OJ's house, which was on Rockingham Avenue or Rockingham Road, they get close to the gate. The officers continually ring the doorbell at the gate. And Mark Furman, who's interviewed in this documentary, describes kind of walking a bit down the street past that gate to the estate's other gate. And near this other gate, Furman sees a white Ford Bronco that's parked near it. And on the driver's side door handle, he sees what looks like blood. And it was later determined to be blood. So the officers in that moment decide that they need to get, inside the property or through this gate. There's now blood at the scene. There's blood on the Bronco, and that's kind of enough to suggest that there could be something going on, whether, OJ, maybe if he was in danger, because, obviously no one knew anything yet at this time. So all they know is his ex-wife is dead, and there's now blood on his Bronco, so they just wanted to see what was going on. So Mark describes how he jumped over the gate or the fence and opens it and lets the other officers in. And they go and they bang on the front door of the house, but there's no answer. So they end up walking around the property to a series of small bungalows, one of which is where Cato Kalin was living. And Cato was a struggling actor, and he was a friend of Nicole's. And he lived with Nicole for, 6 or 7 months. And then OJ had offered to let him stay in one of the bungalows on his property. Because as you know, OJ was rich, had a huge estate. So he had a series of kind of guest houses that were in behind the main house. So Cato was living here at this time. And so they walk around the house and, knock on Cato's door. And he informs them that OJ was not home. He was in Chicago. He got on a flight late last night. So knowing that OJ wasn't on the property and was out of town gave them a sigh of relief. He wasn't in immediate danger, or, if it was someone who was targeting him as well. So 2 LAPD officers leave the scene, but Mark Furman stays behind and talks to Cato Kalin. So, at the time, they're not treating OJ's estate at Rockingham as a crime scene or anything. They're not there to investigate that. They're just there to make sure kind of OJ's okay, seeing what's up. So, it makes sense that these officers would leave the crime, would leave Rockingham. They don't think anything of it. They've checked in. They know OJ's okay. That's fine. So they go. So it's Mark who decides to stay behind and, just question Cato, because they still don't really know what's going on. So they just want some more information from Cato. And when asked about what Cato was doing, the night before, Cato says that he was in his bungalow talking on the phone to a friend when all of a sudden he feels, loud thumps on the wall of his house. And he thought it might have been something like an earthquake, but it was enough to kind of shake the photos on the wall. Furman then walks outside and goes behind the row of bungalows, and it's here that he sees a brown leather glove, one that's eerily similar to the brown leather glove that they find at the crime scene at Nicole's home. So it's this connection to the 2 properties and the fact that, one glove from the same pair of gloves, or seemingly the same pair of gloves, are found at each property. This kind of begins to shine the light on OJ as not just a person of interest, but potentially the number 1 suspect. They did call Nicole's family to break the news. Normally that's a conversation, obviously, that you would have in person, but their concern was that the media was going to break the news right away and that the story would be out there. And so, for fear of her family hearing it on the news, they wanted to be the ones to break that to the family. So, one of the officers that's describing this in the documentary talks about that phone call and hearing in the background Nicole's sister saying that they knew that he was going to kill her. So that already in their minds, they know who did it and who to look into, even though the investigation hadn't gotten far yet.
So OJ was tracked down and he was contacted at his hotel that morning in Chicago. And by all accounts, he did seem very frantic and distraught by the news. When he was trying to make accommodations to get back as soon as he could to LA, the person on the other end of the phone, which was like a travel agent or someone at the airport, they report that they hear glass shatter on the floor, and then OJ says he had cut his finger on a glass. And when his hotel room was searched in Chicago, police do find broken glass in the sink. They find blood-stained towels in the room, and they conclude that it was likely that he had cut himself on the glass in the hotel room that night, even though they never tested the glass itself to see if there was blood on it. They just figured that everything looked like, he broke this glass and cut himself and was bleeding everywhere. So OJ flew back to LA and he was questioned by the LAPD upon his return. And investigators noticed that he did have a small cut on his hand when he was questioned, and he just nonchalantly reiterated that he had broke a glass while in Chicago, just like he had told that woman on the phone.
So, here we are, like one day after, the murders had taken place, and there's already, quite a bit that's coming up and a lot of things that are being found, and, the investigation is much underway. They've already discovered one glove at the crime scene, another glove behind OJ's Rockingham estate. They found blood on OJ's white Ford Bronco and a cut on OJ's hand. So these things alone, of course, while circumstantial, and even though there was an explanation for the cut, according to OJ, these things alone are circumstantial, but certainly things are not getting off to a good start for OJ, at least from this. And this is, of course, breaking news. On the 13th, the news gets out that OJ Simpson's ex-wife and her friend Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her home. So this is major news in America and the world, and kind of really ignites the firestorm that we're going to be talking about. And this is kind of where it all begins for this case. Do you guys have any thoughts so far about just this part of the initial investigation or anything that's come up so far?
For me, I think just before, even if you didn't know anything about the evidence that they find, just kind of how brutal the attacks were for someone that is kind of knows true crime a little bit. That's what they would call a personal attack. Like, someone doesn't stab somebody that many times randomly. It's someone that's in a rage or some sort of emotional or someone that's driven emotionally that would do that kind of thing, stab that many times, go back and slit her throat after she's already dead. So that kind of gives you a hint of maybe who did this and why.
Yeah, like, I'm still wondering why they never tested that glass at the hotel for, like, blood or anything. To me, that just blows my mind. If, like, there's blood on the sheets or the towels, like, you think you would test that piece of glass to know for sure that that's what he cut his finger on, because who knows what he cut his finger on. If
Also, I was just going to ask Katie, like, I know that was your research, I feel like, that part of it. Do you know where, like, what source that was? Because, like, the information that I saw and, like, the research I did didn't say anything about him actually, that account of him cutting his finger in Chicago. So I had much kind of different information, which kind of goes to show you how much conflicting info there is in this case. But I was just wondering, like, if that was, like, a confirmed thing, or if that was, like, you know, what one of his defense lawyers or something had said.
Yeah, so that came from the book from one of his defense lawyers. F. Lee Bailey wrote a book. And of course, I'll go into this book later, called The Truth About the O.J. Simpson Trial. And that, yeah, it came out of that book as part of his defense.
Okay, so I guess we don't know. I mean, obviously, any book written from any perspective is going to be biased towards that side, but so do we know for sure that he did cut his finger in Chicago, or is that sort of like just what the story that the defense is going with?
Like, I in my mind, I feel like there was a recording of this somewhere, and obviously that didn't come from the book because I'm, like, hearing it in my mind.
I'm pretty sure it was the documentary that I watched. I can't remember the name of the documentary.
Okay,
now.
yeah. I'm getting them mixed up, which one it came from, but yeah, I think there was an actual recording of him being like, oh shit, I just dropped a glass.
Like, I'll talk about, like, the documentary that I watched that I really enjoyed. I'll talk about it later on in the case, but pretty sure it came from the documentary, Is OJ Innocent? I think there's a recording in there that like, the police are talking to him and they show him, like, a cut on his finger. And they show, like, pictures of his finger.
Yeah. But there's also a recording of him actually talking to this woman on the phone.
Oh,
and then you can hear, like, a glass shatter, and he's like, "Oh, I just cut my finger." I'm pretty sure that actually happened. It's in my mind that it happened.
I remember seeing that or hearing that somewhere too. I can't remember where it was. I've watched so many of them that but I do remember that though.
Okay, yeah, because I've watched a lot of different things too, so sometimes it's confusing. I know that Is OJ Innocent documentary. If that's the one I'm thinking about, I have issues with that documentary in general, which I'll go into. But I feel like in the OJ Made in America documentary, there was the prosecution, like Marsha Clark, like the major prosecutor in the case, was talking, and this kind of gets into, which we'll talk about in the next part, about like when OJ's questioned when he returns from Chicago. There's a lot of questioning about the cut on his finger and all of that. So my impression was that, like, there was no official account that he actually cut his finger in Chicago. But again, there's a lot of conflicting information, and like I've watched a lot of docs, so it's confusing which information came from where. But that was my idea, was that, like, there was never actually anything official that he actually did cut his finger. It was just kind of his story, but there was nothing to actually back that up. But if you said there's an actual audio recording, then obviously I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I'm gonna look into that because I want to find the source that actually came from.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where we're gonna end this part 1. So we're gonna be back in part 2 to talk more and continue on from there and get more of our thoughts and everything from what follows in this investigation, which trust me, this is kind of just the beginning of everything and the tip of the iceberg. And so we'll be back in part 2, and we hope you'll join us to hear the rest, or to hear more about this case. So until then, I'll see you in part 2. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.